Well, there's been an escalation in the ongoing war against the unvaccinated. Germany, not all of Germany, but one German state, Hesse, which students of American history might remember as home of the Hessians, who were mercenaries hired by King George to come fight the Patriots in the 13 colonies, still is an enemy of freedom, just as they were back in the 1770s and 1780s. They have just, I guess, amended their laws against anti-discrimination, and what's the term? Not public access, public accommodation, to allow even food stores, meaning grocery stores, in the state of, I think they actually call it the Free State of Hesse, to bar the unvaccinated from their stores, meaning that if you don't have your vaccine, and Publix, or, well, not Publix, what do they have over there in Germany? Lidl, I think that's how you say it, or Lidl, L-I-D-L, and Aldi, they can just say, nope, no food for you. You just sit out there and starve. Now, some of you who are longtime listeners to this channel will know that actually, in principle, I don't like anti-discrimination laws. I think they're silly. They shouldn't exist. But what makes this so frightening is that the state is openly endorsing this kind of discrimination against the unvaccinated. It's not like this is a pure market where some stores say, you know what, we're really bigoted and we don't like people who didn't take the jab, and then other stores could look at that and say, hey, there's this whole huge pool of unvaccinated people who have nowhere else to shop, so I'm going to be the one store that they can shop at, and that's good for me. That's not what we have here across the world. The discrimination against the unvaccinated is being pushed implicitly or explicitly by the state in almost every jurisdiction across the planet. So the state amending their anti-discrimination law and the public accommodation law and creating a loophole for unvaccinated people, saying, well, you can discriminate against these folks. They are pretty strongly, with a wink and a nod, telling these stores you shouldn't be letting people who didn't take their medicine in. You need to keep them out in the cold, and you need to let them starve because they're bad and they didn't do the right thing. And the state has many ways, many avenues through which they can impose their will upon private businesses. Something like a grocery store, would be subject to things like inspections. Of course, there's always a business license. Any number of ways that the state of Hesse could get at a grocery store that, let's say, does something really unsafe and unsanitary by letting unvaccinated people in. They could scrutinize that store's sanitation, more than the other stores, because, they could focus all their energy on this, because they say, well, we know these other stores are safe because there's no vaccinated people in there, but you're letting unvaccinated people into your store. We need to go over it with a fine-tooth comb and make sure that you aren't spreading disease. And so this would be very, very concerning if this were to catch on as a trend in Germany and start to spread across the world. We saw briefly in France there were some attempts at trying to bar unvaccinated people from grocery stores, and there was an uprising against that, which was nice to see. I'm not sure what the current status of that is there. But this in general is a trend which must be followed very closely and guarded against. It's very dangerous, the way in which discrimination against unvaccinated people is being normalized. Because, of course, being unvaccinated is just a proxy for being a political other, for being the enemy class. Right now it's about vaccines, but in a few years, it could be about something completely different. But it's still the same people. We all know when the media talks about the unvaccinated, we know who they mean. And in Germany, they probably mean a very specific group of people, too. The unvaccinated have been reduced to the status of modern lepers. It makes me glad that I live in a place like Florida, where we have been on the forefront of trying to impose all these measures long before they were ever reality. I recall DeSantis here did he had sort of like an experts roundtable talking about a lot of issues, but specifically I remember him bringing up vaccine passports, and that was just an idea at that time. It was not something that had been implemented anywhere. It was not something that people were talking about too much, certainly in the media. The media didn't want to start that talk yet. They were starting, more with the nudge, and they were not yet to the stage of the push or the shove. And DeSantis made it clear that that will never be tolerated here. We're not going to have a biomedical security state, which is dividing people into separate castes based on their medical history. And it's just amazing to see how places that, growing up, I would have thought were somewhat close to where I live culturally and politically. Sure, there are disagreements here and there. Oh, everywhere else is terrible on guns. But, at the end of the day, we have similar values. There are those, what are they called? The shared Western values, right? There's none of that anymore. That doesn't exist. Western Europe, the Anglosphere, I bear no sort of cultural or political affinity to them at all. Which not to get off track into foreign policy, but it's just another reason to reconsider all these international alliances we have. Why are we doing this big submarine deal with a police state like Australia? Oh, we have to protect, we have to help Australia, defend itself from China, or else Australia might come under the rule of authoritarianism. God forbid. Or NATO. It's like, oh my gosh, we have to defend Germany and France and Britain from those evil Ruskies who, by all accounts, have been, far freer over the last 2 years than their Western European counterparts. From what I understand, in Russia and certainly Hungary and other parts of Eastern Europe, they're not mandating people go get their vaccine because they understand that's a personal decision. And you know what? It's just probably not a good idea to antagonize the populace by trying to force them into doing something that they don't want that much. Yet those scary Slavs in Eastern Europe are supposed to be the ones that we're all afraid of. And we're supposed to be protecting them from the psychopaths in Western Europe. Or, I'm sorry, I hit that backwards, although it makes more sense the way I said it. We're supposed to be defending the psychopaths in Western Europe from the, relatively reasonable and free Eastern Europeans. And, it's true that the international Western elite really doesn't see the irony. Someone in the fantastic debate between Bill Kristol and Scott Horton, in which Bill Kristol, understandably got walloped because he's an intellectual lightweight. Someone asked him during the Q&A period, hey, Bill, you're for interventions and trying to overthrow bad governments in certain countries if it's, in America's best interest, in your opinion. Why don't we go overthrow the government of Australia? Since, they're so tyrannical. And Kristol, it's not just that he disagreed. He genuinely appeared confused by the question. He had no idea why someone would say that, Australia is an authoritarian government. That's ridiculous. I mean, how could you even say that jokingly? He really thought it was a joke, and he thought it was a joke in poor taste because it was that wrong and away from reality. He doesn't understand, to him and to the Western elite, to be authoritarian and anti-democratic means you don't go along with what the Western intelligentsia tells you to do. That's what it means to be democratic. It means you take the Soros money, you inject your kids with hormones, you take your vaccine, you smile and wave at the troops as they are getting on the ship going off to Iraq, and you say Assad gassed his own people, and if anyone ever asks you for evidence, you shout them down as an Assad toady. That's what it means to be democratic in the eyes of the Western elite. And so Australia does all those things. Australia even sent troops to Vietnam. Australia is, probably the most committed U.S. ally when it comes to regime change. They always have been. They go along with literally everything that the U.S. does. And because of that, by definition, they cannot be an authoritarian regime. And so the Wizards of Smart would say the same thing about, Hesse in Germany or whatever. Oh, it's not a violation of your freedoms to be denied food because you didn't take a medical procedure that the regime, commanded of you. It's your fault for not listening to the regime. And so when I look at stories like this, I think to myself, sure, yes, these are the darkest times of my lifetime, but I hope by the time I'm dead, these will still be the darkest times of my lifetime, and that things don't get, from a civil liberties standpoint, significantly worse than this. Now, I think things could get worse in terms of, political destabilization and social conflict and things like that. But in terms of the state imposing its will upon ordinary people around the world, I hope this is as bad as it gets on a global scale. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.